Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas podcast, where we embark on a journey through our diverse Texas landscapes and breathtaking trails while always engaging with our amazing Texas hiking community. So settle in, tighten up those bootlaces, and get ready for the thrilling tales awaiting for you on this episode. Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas podcast. I'm your host, Jason. And yes, the rumors are true. He is back by popular demand. The one and only John. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me back, buddy. So excited to
Absolutely.
talk with you again.
Absolutely. I know we kind of just touched on, because, we're usually talking throughout the weeks, but I'm really having fun with this kind of series that I have on the podcast. And, to the listeners, in case you haven't heard, I think 2 episodes ago, I was driving to go rock climb and just kind of thinking about, what I feel would be of interest to our Texas hiking community. And for some reason, it just hit me that when I go on vacation to maybe not so much Washington, but certainly to New Mexico, to Colorado, at times I see more Texas license plates than I do local license plates. So we are out in force at some of these, beautiful destinations. And it kind of hit me that I thought it would be really cool to bring on to the podcast experts or definitely who I consider to be experts in some of these areas that we go vacationing, hiking, and backpacking. Maybe at times cause more issues than probably needed, and certainly due to not having the expertise. But I think Washington, there it's probably not as a popular destination as Colorado, but I would definitely argue that it's probably the prettiest state in the United States. And I definitely know, looking through Texas hiking Facebook pages and stuff, that we do go there, we do travel, we do have questions. So, I started to kind of think about putting these podcast series together. One being that's currently published. I think I have one more part to publish for Colorado. We have you, Washington. I have my really good friend, Sam, for New Mexico. Then I
Yeah.
have another friend in Arizona.
Oh,
So
yeah.
look, yeah, so those are kind of the main destinations. And not to say that I won't come up with any more, but I think those are the most bang for the buck where we're going to vacation and stuff. So
Yeah.
again, thank you for coming on the podcast. And I don't know if I've probably said it in a lot of the episodes. I consider you probably the most experienced hiker, backpacker, mountaineer that I know. And I would never think about doing an episode on Washington State without having you as part of it. So thanks.
Oh, absolutely, brother. Yeah, and I mean, I echo everything you said there, and applaud you for the idea and pursuing it. That is definitely cool. I mean, it's same thing here. There's a huge hiking community in Washington, and we go to Big Bend.
Yeah.
We go to places in Colorado or down to the Sierras in California. So it's definitely cool to have these geographic specific episodes where you have somebody from another state that may also have connections to Texas, but that can tell your listeners there in Texas what it's like to hike in Washington.
Yeah, and there's 2 things that kind of come to mind, and it's just pulling from my experience hiking some, pretty epic hikes in Washington and in Colorado. The whole process was way overwhelming to me. In Colorado, outside of, starting early and making sure you're below tree line before noon because of the thunderstorms, that's okay. That's kind of easy, but the parking, the trailheads, you can't park on the road, but then people are parking on the road. And then if
What
you
kind of
get,
permit and pass do you need?
yes, what kind of permit and pass do you need? And I know
Yeah.
when I was in Washington, you gave me the website and I was still lost. So I just did days, whether I needed it or not, put it in the dashboard and said, oh, well, It,
Yeah.
we'll with the cars back when I get back, it'll be a bonus. So it just the whole process was just overwhelming. So, I hope that these episodes that are, that have been published and that are coming up just kind of relieve some of the anxiety that we as Texas hikers will and or would and will face, going to these beautiful destinations. So, again, thanks for coming on. And kind of to kick this off, I think it's really important, especially with your point of view. To the listeners, John has hiked everywhere, mountaineering, hiking, backpacking. What do you think that makes Washington State unique compared to other regions in the United States?
Right. Yeah. And the first thing I would do is echo the word region. We don't. This is something that I found strange when I moved here. I'm from West Texas, obviously. Grew up in Midland, Odessa. So my where I discovered the outdoors and mountains was Fort Davis and Big Bend and the Guadalupes and had parents that brought me camping there a lot. But definitely the one thing I noticed right away when I came up here is there was a kind of a regional pride, and it really had to do with our climate and our topography. Whereas in the South and then definitely like up through the Midwest and up into the upper Midwest, there's so much state pride, Texas, not Oklahoma, or people in Ohio can't stand people in Michigan, and and
Well,
there's all this kind of pride around your state. But we don't even very rarely will you even see Washington like mentioned by itself or Oregon mentioned by itself. We refer to ourselves as the PNW, the
yeah.
Pacific Northwest, and it's real common to see stickers on the bumpers of cars or coffee cups or whatever that say PNW something, and so there's a lot of pride in our. I suppose in a sense it's our climate that we all kind of share with southern British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, and maybe a tiny bit of Northern California as well. But then the forests that are produced because of that climate and the land and the topography. So it's I mean we're famous for fir trees and rain and mist and yeah, that would definitely be my answer.
It's also kind of funny. I was doing some research for this episode. You and I talk a lot about the diversity that you see in Texas, and absolutely Texas is diverse.
Hmm.
I think you've even mentioned some of the pictures that I posted. You're like, wait, is that Arizona? But so what about Washington? Can you describe or kind of go through the different landscapes or
Yes,
that
yeah,
you've
and it's
experienced in Washington?
definitely, and it's always going to be east to west or west to east. So obviously, we're West Coast, so our coastlines are the Pacific Ocean, and then as you come inland, and this is going to be the same in Washington or Oregon, or British Columbia, but you're going to have lots and lots of fir trees and old growth evergreen forests. That are immediately right inland off the coast. Then there's almost always going to be a coastal range. So there's kind of short mountains that usually ride up out of the coast, and then you have the valleys after that for about 100 miles. That's where most of the population are. I mean, that would be places like Seattle and Portland, and I-5 goes right up the middle of that. That's where I live, about halfway between Seattle and Portland. And then we have the Cascade Range. The Cascade Range parallels the coastline. It's due north south, and that's full of enormous volcanoes. Mount Hood and Mount Rainier being the two most famous of those that they're kind of instantly recognizable by most anyone in the country if you're into hiking and so forth. And Cascades are covered in snow, of course. Still have glaciers on them, most of them, most all of
Yeah.
the higher peaks, and then as you start to get over the Cascade crest and as you're moving eastward, things change a lot. You don't have anywhere near as much underbrush in the forest. It turns into kind of piney forest. Might look a little bit like East Texas, actually, or
Mm,
definitely some of the mountain ranges that you see in Colorado or northern New Mexico, or would look the same. And that's kind of the eastern flanks of the Cascades, and then eventually, as the Cascades level off, it turns into kind of high desert. There's also a lot of farmland over there, but eastern Washington, I mean, there's some canyons and stuff in eastern Washington that you would swear like we're in Arizona. Um,
yeah.
and it's very hot. So Eastern Washington is 100 degrees all the time in the summertime, and then it can be bitterly cold in the winter. Not uncommon at all to be well below 0 Fahrenheit in Eastern Washington in the wintertime. And so it's really kind of two different, just in terms of geography and topography. It's almost two different states, really. You have the west side and the east side.
And when you kind of look at it in that perspective, and you see what we have in Texas, what do you think from someone in my community would get the most bang for their buck? If they wanted to plan a trip, I would assume it wouldn't be the eastern part of Washington. It would be
No,
probably the mountains and
yeah, there's not much. There's not
Rainier,
much in
Olympics.
Eastern Washington is it's almost all agrarian. So apple orchards. We're one of the number one producers of apples in the world in Eastern
No.
Washington. So there's that, and then just a whole lot of ranch land, ranchers, cattle, that kind of thing, and then a lot of very, very small towns. So there's definitely not much that would attract a tourist to Eastern Washington. There's one big city in Eastern Washington named Spokane.
Yeah.
People definitely would go there for various reasons. There's like large convention center and things. Gonzaga University is there.
Okay.
And then, of course, like Washington State University over there in Pullman. So people definitely do visit Eastern Washington, but usually it's going to be for sports or concerts, those kinds of things. Yeah, there is hiking. In fact, there's even like Facebook groups, Eastern Washington hikers, and there is some hiking trails, definitely for sure.
So is there a rivalry between the eastern part and the western part?
Sometimes, but there's
Yeah.
there's like. I think there's like maybe a couple 100,000 people that live in Eastern Washington, and 4 or 5 million that live in Western Washington.
So they win. So I want you to answer this in two parts.
Okay.
So the question is, in your opinion, what is the best hiking season for someone like you, a native? What do you enjoy the most? And then what you would think someone coming in from Texas, knowing that we're not maybe that familiar with traversing in snow and
Yeah.
all the things that kind of leads itself to. And mind you, remember the first time we were at Mount Rainier and we were heading up, I guess, to Muir Snowfields, and you start pointing out possible risks of avalanche and stuff, and I was like, Ava, what? Like, are you trying to kill me?
Yeah.
And so what would be, I guess, firstly, what is your favorite hiking, backpacking, mountaineering season?
Okay. Well, I'm weird. I mean, just my favorite season in general is winter. I'm the opposite of most people.
Yeah.
But I mean, fall, I suppose. Yeah, September can be pretty wonderful here in the Cascades. We're done with the hot. We're done with mosquitoes and bugs and all that kind of stuff, and it can sometimes just be perfect. But as far as advice to listeners in Texas or someplace that or people that just aren't familiar with the Pacific Northwest, I would say, well, here's what I would say. I would say spring, but I don't really mean spring in the sense of the calendar and the way that we normally think of spring, right? When we say spring, most people are thinking April and May. But the snow doesn't melt here usually until about July 4th. And I get that. I see that all the time when I'm up at Mount Rainier and I run into some tourists from out of state. They'll be there maybe late May and they're thinking it's spring. And it's like, no, there's still 6 feet of snow, everywhere in the Cascades. And they're like, well, we're having soccer games for our kid and it's 90 degrees back home. We just assumed it was spring. And it's like everything is really delayed and late in the Pacific Northwest because of the massive amounts of snow that we get during the wintertime. And so July, like usually by July 4th, the majority of the snow is either melted or is almost melted from most of the trails. And then any place you get above timberline and in Washington State, up high, up about timberline tends to be about 5,000 feet here in Washington, which is drastically different for folks that are from New Mexico or Colorado. It's much, much, much lower here, but But right where you get into the alpine meadows and stuff, right after that snow melts, about a week or two after the snow's gone is when we get all of our wildflowers. And it's, some years it's mid July, some years it's late July, some years it's early August, but like probably like the third week of July, you're going to be solid almost every single year. But that's when the wildflowers are at their peak, and I don't know, there's just nothing like it. I've been to a lot of places in the world, a lot of places in this country, and I'm really into photography, landscape photography. So I'm always in those groups, and I've never seen any place that's as beautiful as the Pacific Northwest. Slightly above timberline when those wildflowers are at their peak. There's just nothing else like it.
I think both times when I went to Rainier, one was in April, one was in July. The time in April, like that one big building is like 3 stories tall, if I remember correctly, and it was almost buried in snow when we got there. Yeah, and all those trees that you're saying, hey, don't walk next to trees because you could slip through and die. I remember that. Those trees had, they're massive trees and they had snow all the way up. Just the tops were sticking out, and that was April.
Yeah, this is it's not super well known, but the Cascade Range, from southern British Columbia down to the very northern tip of California, Mount Shasta, it's the snowiest mountain range on planet Earth. We literally get more. There's no place on Earth that has average annual snowfalls that are higher than the Cascades. We just get outrageous amounts of snow. There's various websites you can look up to kind of look at these things, and Valdez, Alaska, for example, is there's a ski resort not too far from there that's famous for that, and then ice climbing in the wintertime. Mount Rainier's averages are nearly double, and then most of your ski resorts in Sun River, Idaho, or what's some of the ones in Breckenridge in Colorado, and we're getting 400 to 500% more snow than those places do. The record is up at Mount Baker. There was one year that they had 1,200 and some odd inches of snow. That's 100 feet. 100 feet of snow in a single winter. It's not unusual for storm cycles to blow through. Have 48 hours or 72 hours of snow, and it might snow 7 feet.
Jeez. And so that kind of leads into the next question. What should hikers know about the weather and its impact on hiking conditions, backpacking conditions? Is it, still kind of like Colorado where you never know when the thunderstorm is going to happen, but it's probably going to happen almost daily between this time? Like, how should we prepare for these types of, and I guess it depending on the season, but also like, what are the best ways to prepare for that?
Right. Yeah. Plan on being wet. Yeah. Wet is the number one word. It's just the Pacific Ocean and the way the storms form there in the Pacific. They like to point right at us, and it's very wet here. There's definitely similarities to the Rockies, to the Rockies in Montana or the Rockies in Colorado or the San Juans. We do get thunderstorms, but they're far less. They don't occur with the kind of regularity that you get in Colorado. Like, if you're hiking in the San Juans at 12 and 13 and 14,000 feet, like you can almost set your watch by the thunderstorms in the afternoon there. We might have them, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 a month in a given location, but it's definitely not a foregone conclusion. But yeah, rain. And then the big, like in terms of snow, and I know, there's huge storms that plow through Colorado too and dump a lot of snow. The main thing about Pacific Northwest snow though, is it tends to be very wet and heavy. Whereas snow in the Rockies tends to be more powdery. So it's relatively easy to stay dry in snowstorms in the Rockies. Because it's going to be cold for one. It's going to be quite cold often. And then the snow itself is very dry and powdery, right? But in the Pacific Northwest, we don't get cold the way that you do in the Rockies. So typically if it's snowing, it might be 33 degrees or 34 degrees, slightly above freezing, right? To where,
No.
certainly it doesn't have the snow as it falls doesn't have time to turn to rain, but things are very, very wet and heavy wet. And so, yeah, being able to have waterproof gear for hiking is very, very important in Washington. And I'm sure we can talk more about this later, but thinking about your insulating layers um, is extremely important, and what's going to happen to them when they get wet. I'm a
No.
I love down. I have several down coats that I just absolutely adore. Wear them in the wintertime when I'm out on walks around town, or if it's going to be dry and we're gonna, I don't know, be standing outside watching a football game down at the local high school. I love my down jackets, but I definitely think twice about bringing them into the mountains on extended trips in Washington, because once down gets wet, it loses like 95% of its insulative values.
Yeah, just real quickly, I've known you for almost what, 9 year, 8 years, something like 7 years. Every dangerous situation that you've been in that we've talked through, it's because of being wet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like your feet, just being wet. And I guess that facilitates hypothermia and all these types of things. But yeah, that's one thing I really got from you is you better understand your layering system, how to layer extra socks, and
Yeah.
and definitely have a plan when some of these things don't work as expected.
Yeah, for sure. I don't
Yeah.
mean to make Washington sound terrible and scary either. There usually is a
Y-
period in July and August where we don't get any precipitation at all for, sometimes 20, 30, 40 days in a row. So it can be quite beautiful. I mean, it's, the mountains here, when it's a nice summer day, it's often, 72 with a nice breeze. I mean, that's, it's hard to beat when things do get nice in the Cascades. But yeah, if you're coming in the spring, and by spring I mean the calendar spring, April, May, June, or if you're here in the autumn, like September or October, yeah, it can definitely get very, very, very wet.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key to the listeners. It's don't be prepared and do not go by what you would normally think of spring, the calendar time and what's normally spring, fall, winter, because it's a totally different animal. And
Oh,
I always, it's a joke, and I do this for the last I don't know how many years, but I'll usually message you right around Thanksgiving, like, is it started raining yet? And then, sometimes it rains for 20, 30 days straight.
yeah, it does. It sure does.
And it's like around Thanksgiving is when it starts to, and maybe a little before that, but that's kind of my calendar that let's see if it started to rain yet because it's coming.
Yep. Rains in the valleys and snows in the mountains.
Yep. So, in your opinion, what are some of the most iconic hikes in Washington that if you're going to take a trip, that you would definitely, this has to be in the list of things that you go see?
Sure. Yeah. Well, number one, and this one's ironic because I have never been there. I used to rock climb a lot in my 20s down on the Icicle Creek Road where this trailhead is located off of. But I mean, overwhelmingly, the most sought after um, hike in the state of Washington is the Enchantments. We have it's an area in the north central Cascades near a little town called Leavenworth. If you're into touristy things, that's definitely a place for you to go. It's like a Bavarian village. You'll feel like you're in Germany, like
Oh,
near the German Dolomites or something. But there's a hike just outside of town there called the Enchantments. Somewhat it would remind people somewhat. It's kind of a mixture of what you would what you would typically see in the high Sierras, like along the John Muir Trail. There's lots and
hmm,
lots of like white granitic granite peaks and stuff, with a mixture of like stuff that you would typically associate with the North Cascades, like larch trees. they look like evergreen trees, but they all have the needles actually change colors and like
Oh
fall
wow.
colors. They go, oranges and yellows and stuff. Um, and so it's those are the you can do it in a day hike, and it's 14 miles. This is definitely something we can talk about when we talk later on when we talk more about Washington topography. But when you think 14 miles, don't think 14 miles on the Lone Star Trail. this is a this is a massive amount of punishing elevation gain. Uh,
Yeah.
there's, there's one section getting up to Asgard Pass that gains, I think, 2,000 feet in less than a mile. Um, so that's like way steeper than like Bear Canyon is in the Guadalupes.
Yeah, so just real quickly, tell the listeners you just attempted the Wonderland Trail, and how many miles and what's that
I did.
elevation gain?
Yeah, so I was going to say the Enchantments is probably the most sought after trail in
Yeah.
Washington State. It's typically backpacked. You can do it in a day, but most people backpack it. Those are the second hardest wilderness permits to get in America, meaning
Mhm.
just the number of people that apply for the permit versus the number of people that are actually awarded. I'm told that the hardest permits to get in America it's a day hike to a place called the Wave in
Yeah.
northern Arizona. The second hardest permits in America to get is the Enchantments.
Yeah.
Also on the top 10 list is what Jason just mentioned there, the Wonderland Trail, and that's a
And so how many miles is that one?
well, there's a couple different variations you can choose from, but it's in the 90s. It's between 90 and 100, depending on like which alternate you take and so forth.
So you brought up the Lone Star Hiking Trail, which is it's maybe just a hair less than that. And what's the elevation gain for the Wonderland Trail?
I think for the whole trail is 30,000 feet.
Yeah, it's something ridiculous, and
Yes.
I don't know what it is, but I doubt it's more than a thousand.
Yeah.
You know, um,
Yeah. Yep. That's definitely a unique feature of Washington, and this would be true also of Colorado and New Mexico. But
mm,
when choosing a hike, and you're thinking, oh well,
attention to the elevation.
I've done a 12-mile hike before, or last year when we were on vacation and such and such of a place, we did 9 miles. Elevation, and then also just like how that elevation is spaced off, it's spaced apart, can really drastically affect how your body reacts to a thing and how hard it is. I mean, I've actually, you've done a couple of 30s, haven't you?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, the longest days I've ever done is in the 20s, low 20s. But I've also had days. This would be mountaineering, really, more than hiking, where we're off trail and stuff. But I've had days where we were on the move for 14 or 15 hours, and we only went 5 miles.
yeah. North Cascades.
Yeah, the North Cascades. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, the Wonderland Trail is that's probably the most well known trail in all of Washington State, and it's a loop basically. Mount Rainier is this huge 14,410 foot peak. It's the highest peak in the state of Washington. It's almost dead center in the state. If you just kind of look at the state of Washington and put your finger in the middle, you're pretty close to Mount Rainier there. And this is a trail that just goes around the mountain. So I think the lowest point is around 2,000 feet, maybe 2,500. And then the highest point is just shy of 7,000. I believe Panhandle Gap's like 6,800 or 6,900.
Yeah.
And that's way up above timberline. But it's 93 miles if you stay on the official Wonderland, and has about 30,000 feet of elevation gain. So it's brutal. It's not quite long distance in the sense of, you think of like the Arizona Trail is 800 miles. I think the Colorado Trail is 500 miles. And then the three big ones, PCT, CDT, Appalachian Trail, those are all over 2,000. But it's also not super short either. And because of the massive elevation gain, it's typically done in, I don't know, really fast backpackers will do it in 5 days, 6 days. But it's probably the most typical itinerary is between 7 and 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
And
you're having, you're doing long, hard days, but not brutally long. You're in camp by dinner time, and then you got a
yeah.
couple hours to spend, taking photographs and hanging out in camp and stuff.
And what I can't understand is you guys don't care about water carry because you're crossing water like every 10 feet. And like for me, in almost anywhere I go hiking in Texas, that's the main thing that I'm concerned with is either caching water or, a water carry. And they're big water carries. Like I've got 6 to 8 liters on an upcoming trip to Guadalupe Mountains. We're going to do multiple days in the backcountry. And I'm dreading carrying all that water.
Sure, yeah. What is water weigh? 8 pounds a gallon, I think.
It's something. It's
Yeah,
not fun.
yeah. So eight. So you're carrying about 16 pounds of water when you're walking away
Yeah,
from
just water.
this water. Yeah, yeah. I did. I
It,
actually did something fun. I did this. This was like literally deliberately in response to you and your show, your podcast here, the Trailblazing Texas podcast. I've listened to a lot of the guests that you've had on, and there's been a lot of talk about water and a couple of times running out of water, and you've had some interesting discussions about water bladders versus water bottles,
I'll stab
and
them suckers.
yep, and your Trucker Joe water bottle sleeves,
Yep.
and lots and lots and lots of talk about water. Well, there's water everywhere in Washington. I mean, not there are some trails, of course, where you might spend a lot of time in an area that is dry. But the Wonderland Trail specifically, I did this just for Jason, just to say that I could. Mike and Megan were both laughing at me a lot of the time, but I didn't carry any water ever. I had 2 empty bottles with me that I did use, in camp, because you want to
Yeah.
have water right next to you for cooking breakfast and cooking dinner and coffee and all those kinds of things. But I carried zero water on our entire time on the trail. I actually bought one of those life straws. It's just like
Oh man.
comes in a little
Yeah.
case, and it's just a straw with a little filter in it. And
Yep.
every time there'd be like a little stream or something, alongside the trail. I would just drink. I would just pull the straw out of my pocket and drink a little bit. And I literally hiked the. Well, we didn't finish. Probably
Yeah.
more on that later. But I literally hiked the Wonderland Trail with no water.
Was it hard to get used to not having water? Like in that mind frame that hey, everything's gonna be okay.
Oh yeah, it didn't bother
Um,
didn't bother me in the
yeah.
slightest. Yeah, I
And
just
you
I'm
know it.
so there was sections of that trail that were new to me that I saw for the first time, but most of it I'd seen before. And
Yeah.
in Mount Rainier National Park, it's pretty rare that you could ever walk 3 miles without coming across water.
So what other iconic hikes should we be on the lookout for
Sure.
heading up there?
Well, I mean, Washington State just has so much. There's just so much hiking here. I mean, there's
Yeah.
literally thousands of hikes in the state. But Mount Rainier National Park, and probably the most famous one at Mount Rainier National Park is just the skyline. There's a place called Paradise on the south side where the road ends, and then there's a trail that, I mean, it's literally if you're going to climb the mountain, that's the one that you go on. But there's a whole network of trails that are all in and around the Skyline Trail that out of Paradise where the road ends there. I mean, that's probably, like, if I was just to tell you what's the greatest day hike in the entire state of Washington, more than likely I would tell you that.
Yeah.
The Skyline Trail. Olympic National Park out on the west side of the state, out there on the peninsula. Hurricane Ridge is a very well known one out there, and then probably the most photographed place in Olympic National Park is the Hoh Rainforest. So there's a rainforest on the interior that you can drive into that has many of the largest known species of particular tree types in the world. So, like, the world's largest yellow spruce is there. The world's largest western red cedar is there. Very big trees. I have been to the redwoods, and they're not quite as big as the California's redwoods, but they're dang close. And so, yeah, there's a section of trail there in the Hoh Rainforest called the Hall of Mosses, and you'd instantly recognize it if you saw the photo, but it's all these old growth maple trees with just moss hanging down from everything. It's just a kind of an explosion of green.
I couldn't fathom. So you said the hurricane was at Ridge?
Hurricane Ridge, yeah.
I remember that because Mia and I went to
Lake
hike.
Angeles.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. You just keep on going up the road basically, and you'd end up at
Yeah.
Hurricane Ridge.
And Olympic National Park, never in my wildest dreams imagined that it would look like that with the trees and the green and even the down trees were beautiful with the moss all over them, and it was it was absolutely incredible. It was
That
like
should,
I was in some kind of Lord of the Rings movie
yeah,
or something. It was just
yep.
incredible.
Definitely the best place in the state to see bears too. Lots and lots
Mm,
and lots of bears out there.
just black bear or what?
Just black bear, yeah. We don't have any. The only grizzlies that we have in Washington are there are grizzlies in Washington, but it's in this not very well known range in far northeastern Washington, right up where Idaho and Canada intersect up there in the top northeastern corner. But we don't. There hasn't been any grizzlies on the west side of the state since the 1960s, I think. There's
Can
there are purported sightings of them in the North Cascades, and actually, the North Cascades has announced they're going to reintroduce them. That's been a whole entire controversy. But
Oh man.
soon there are going to be grizzlies reintroduced to the North Cascades.
Oh wow.
Right, it's basically a big national park on the northern border of Washington, right up near Canada.
Yeah. So, man, trying to think of like just reintroducing species like that, especially of that magnitude, like that's it's not a joke. Like it's a
Yeah,
grizzly bear.
yeah,
And and what who are you impacting by that?
right. I mean, eventually, if trends continued, they'd probably end up back there anyway. They're not that much
Yeah.
north of the border in Canada. They basically got hunted all the way out into up into Alaska and northern Canada, and then for the last bunch of decades of protecting them and managing the species, they've slowly made their way further and further south back into their natural what once was their natural habitats. But
So can you kind of give a comparison between the Olympic National Park and Rainier? I mean, I think those are probably the two most famous and
yep,
I would say most visited. And what like is what would you expect in one park versus the other? What does one
yeah,
have that the other one doesn't have?
yeah.
Those types of things.
Rainier is going to be I mean, they're both going to have a lot of trees. They both can get wet. They
Yeah.
both going to have a lot of snow in the wintertime. But there are definitely some key differences. It is a little bit wetter actually out there on the Olympics. There's some places on the western side of the Olympic National Park that's often some of the wettest places on Earth. Actually, it rains there a lot. But Olympic is diverse too because it goes all the way to the coast. So when you see those pictures of like sea stacks, these rocky formations riding up, just coming up out of the ocean along the coast, that's typically Olympic National Park or very near there. Um,
Yeah.
and so you have a whole. I mean, there's a whole entire like coastal ecosystem that you can visit. And then Olympic National Park is I would say it's much less developed, much less built up, has much less facilities. Um, Now, if you're hiking, and especially if you're backpacking, um, there's not a really that much of a major difference, right? In the terrain in the backcountry of Rainier versus the terrain in the backcountry of Olympic. The Olympics are slightly steeper, but not a major difference. But yeah, you're going to have a whole lot less paved roads, less snack bars, bathrooms,
Mhm.
lodges, that kind of stuff at Olympic. And there's a lot of the Olympics are a lot more remote too. There's kind of roads all the way around the edges, but the only way to get inside is to walk. And so there's some places that are deep in the Olympics that are very hard to get to. Whereas Rainier, you can drive within a if you're a super strong hiker, there's not much you can't get to in a day,
Yeah.
because of how much further in the roads go from various locations. Um, yeah,
And so, like, if we're just looking at day use and stuff, I guess we would encounter less people in the Olympics versus Rainier?
yes, yeah, I would definitely say that. I think the visitorship is actually slightly higher in Olympic
Mm,
National Park than it is in Rainier, but because it's so much more spread out and there's
yeah.
so many other like areas you can kind of get close to it, that it wouldn't feel that way. Um, here's what I would say too is just pick a part of, if you're going to come visit Washington, pick a part of the state and just see it. Like, don't feel like I see these sometimes on some of the Facebook groups, so and so's flying in from Massachusetts and they have 5 days and they want to, they're going to try to see the North Cascades National Park, the Olympic National Park, and Mount Rainier National Park. And it's just like, you're not gonna, I mean, can you physically drive to those three? Yeah, you can physically drive to those three places with 5 days, but day one you're flying in and day five you're flying out. So you really just have 3 days. You can do it, but what are you really gonna, going to experience? Both of those places have more than enough stuff where you could spend a week, a typical week's vacation.
It's like talking to somebody in Europe and they're going, oh, we're going to fly into New York and then see Texas and then see California. You're like, how many days are you going to be here?
It's just like, I don't think you understand the scale of the things. And then here's the thing about Washington too. We have these lesser known natural areas that, they may not be national parks, but maybe they're wilderness areas or they're national scenic areas that would be, they'd be the crown jewel of some states. But because we just have so much here, they don't get talked about as much. This one, because you and I have been down there, but the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, this would be the border of Washington and Oregon. Washington and Oregon is split by the Columbia River, big, huge river that flows out of Canada and then eventually spits into the ocean there near Portland. And that area is famous for, there's mountains that rise up out of the Columbia on both sides, both borders. And there's just waterfalls galore. I think
I counted 24 waterfalls when we were just driving in like maybe an hour.
They're everywhere. Yeah.
Yes.
The Oregon side, I think it's the most like waterfalls per square mile anywhere in the lower 48.
Yeah.
There's just waterfalls galore. And there's tons and tons of hiking trails down there on both sides of the river. So, that could, you're in Texas and you're thinking about visiting, Washington State or whatever. You could fly into Portland, and I think the scenic area, I don't even think it's 20 miles from the Portland airport. And you could easily spend a 3, 4, 5, 6 days in the Columbia River Gorge. With some beautiful hikes with, that include, mountain summits and waterfalls like crazy, and lots and lots and lots of good restaurants and breweries down there in those little towns too. It's not a national park, but it's just outstandingly beautiful.
What was that trail that we did?
Dog Mountain. That's one of the harder ones. Mountain. Yeah. We did that in the middle of winter.
Didn't you tell me somebody just here recently either died or got hurt and they had to rescue them or something?
They did. Yeah. Somehow they fell down that open escarpment up there where all that kind of that meadow grass is and all that.
Yeah.
I have no idea how they did that.
Yeah, that was crazy when you were telling me that. And I think that trip was really exciting because I know probably I will never hike the PCT or the AT or the Continental Divide Trail. But I got to step on the Bridge of the Gods. So, heading in between the two, Oregon and Washington, and I was pumped.
Yeah. You go down there in July or August and there's constantly dirty hikers walking across that thing.
Yep. And I almost thought I was a dirty hiker there for a second.
A day we were.
Yeah. And, and just kind of thinking about the Pacific Crest Trail and how, a segment of that goes through Washington. What makes that special?
Yeah. The Washington section is pretty special because of its remoteness. The PCT in Washington State does tend to stay extremely remote. By that time, I know this, like, as far as PCT hikers go and through hiking, everybody's hike your own hike, and different people have kind of, different philosophies about that. But throughout much of California and much of Oregon, the trail goes really close to a lot of these, various little trail towns. And there's a lot of the towns in Oregon and the towns in California that are very near the PCT are famous for, accommodating hikers, and they do various things for them. And there's hiker hostels that are run by churches, and there's festivals and just like restaurants that know all about them, and laundromats that cater to them, and just various things. But in Washington, the PCT, in the places that it does cross roads, um, tend to be just in the middle of nowhere, really, like a long way from a town. It's not that you couldn't hitchhike to one, but it's a 20-mile hitchhike or something, much more extensive. And so the Washington section is definitely known for being remote. You can, and even we have a huge hiking community in Washington. A lot of the popular trails are just that. They're popular. You can feel like you're like I mentioned the skyline. If you were to go hike the skyline on a Saturday when the weather's nice, you might feel like you're walking through the mall. There's so many people.
It'll be like you're in Colorado trying to do a 14er and there's no parking and people are
Yeah,
yelling at you because they want your parking spot when you've done your hike. It's a
yeah,
madhouse.
yep, for sure, for sure. But a lot of the PCT is some pretty remote trailheads. You got to drive down Forest Service roads to get to them or whatever, and it's just not on. They're not on any of those websites that you Google when you're coming in from out of state and you want to go visit something. So you can definitely find solitude in the mountains on the PCT without a doubt.
So what I hear you saying is the PCT, it's no bragging rights until you get to Washington and complete that.
Yeah,
It's like, and
yeah, it kicks a lot of people's butts. Yeah,
yeah,
and part of it too is it's just the nature of hiking the PCT Nobo, but you're not getting to Washington until late, and by that time, some years the weather's still nice, but some years it's starting to get nasty. I mean, you can definitely get snowed on, and yeah,
yeah. I was talking to Andrew with Trail Brush. I don't know if you've ever seen that product, and and it was him talking about hiking the AT, and his thing was, okay, look, it's like going on a 4 or 5 night backpacking trip between Dollar Generals, and
yeah,
you are really never
yeah,
far from a town. So it's not. Yes, I wish that he was like, yeah, I wish I could say it was like remote and all this, but no, it was just, oh,
right.
here's the next Dollar General. All right, let's go.
Yeah, yeah. My buddy, our friend Mike, that
Yeah,
I guess you only met him the one time when I met you, but you've of course know him from our group chats and stuff like that. But
yeah,
he joked that there's so much trail magic on the AT. He wondered if you could just not bring food.
really. That sounds like a challenge for him to do.
I'm sure not every section of the AT is like that, but certainly
Yeah,
like along Skyline Drive and stuff like that. He said sometimes like you could eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner just for free, just trail magic.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
I'm
definitely not
I'm
going to happen
working.
on the PCT and on the PCT in Washington. In fact,
Yeah,
this is a fair number of through hikers will do this. Actually, they won't do any box resupplies through the mail for hardly any of California or Oregon, but they will do it for Washington,
yeah,
because there's these little, like at White Pass, for example, where the PCT crosses Highway 12. At White Pass, there's a little gas station slash general store. Um, I mean, it's like a 7-Eleven basically, more or less, but at a pass in the mountains, and then it's a long hitchhike to any town from there. And they will allow PCT hikers to send boxes there. And then
yeah,
the next one north of that is Snoqualmie, same exact sort of a scenario. There's a ski resort there, but it's not open in the summertime, but you can have a box sent there. Same thing at Stevens Pass. But yeah, the PCT is definitely unique for being remote. And if you're a backpacker, if you guys got, if some of your listeners there in Texas or abroad are backpackers, and you want to come to Washington for a week, say you got a Monday to a Friday off, so you're gonna fly up here into either Seattle or Portland, on a Saturday, and then you're gonna leave the following weekend. Doing a PCT section is definitely like a solid choice, and you don't need any permits. There's no permits required for any of our PCT sections. There are some places in Oregon that you have to have one, and there are some places in California that you have to have them. But
yeah.
Washington is wide open. Yeah, yeah. So that would. most of them tend to be between 50 and 80 miles. So, and the
Okay.
PCT is the way the PCT was built and graded too. It doesn't tend to be bad steep. Um, it's still Washington. It's still the Cascades, and there's certainly still climbs, but
Yeah.
none of them are horrible.
No. There's a gentleman, his trail name is Coach, and he owns Marion Outdoors. It's an outfitter on the AT in Marion, Virginia, and he
Hmm.
also operates a hostel. So we've been kind of going back and forth. I want to get him on the
Yeah,
podcast just for the stories and the AT through hikers. And he
yeah,
has a really good channel, just about hiking and backpacking information and stuff. So, but yeah, I can't wait. You're talking about like hiker trash and dirty hikers. I'm sure he's got some
yeah,
really good
yeah.
stuff to.
Some years we go do trail magic at Chinook Pass, which is halfway between White and Snoqualmie. It's just where a road, the PCT crosses a paved highway, but there's literally nothing there other than trailheads for hikers. That's it. It's the place where I met Megan actually.
Yeah.
But so no hikers, or it's only 30 miles from White too. So everybody just resupplied at White Pass. They're not trying to get off. It's really just a crossing. That's it. So it's a fun place to go and do trail magic for hikers who weren't expecting it.
So how do you know? Like, are you following the bubble and or you just like like around this time that's
I
when
know
it.
around that time, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's there's probably a solid 6 or 7 weeks from where they first start
Ah,
coming
okay.
through to where to where the back end comes through. So
Oh, nice. So going on to what are some, and I think we kind of talked a little bit, but maybe not in so much detail, but what are some lesser known trails or places in Washington for, you get that bang for the buck, but it's just less crowded. So you still have the views,
yep,
the hikes, the wildlife, the
yeah,
wildflowers, but you're just not having a Colorado 14er type of a crowd.
sure, yeah. The Columbia River Gorge is a great example.
Yeah.
It can be somewhat crowded, but if you the most crowded time of the year for the Columbia River Gorge is actually wintertime, when
Hmm.
because the Columbia River is basically sea level.
Yeah.
And so when most all of the trailheads in the Columbia River Gorge in the wintertime are still snow free, down low. And then partway through the hike, you'll start to get into snow. And then, depending on how high up, or which hike you chose or how high up you're going, then you might get into a lot of snow where you might need snowshoes or something like that.
We
But
got slammed by snow.
we did. Yeah, we did.
And the parking lot was full of snow.
Yeah. And so, but like a lot of the roads in the mountains aren't even open in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So there's limited choices unless you're just into skiing or snowshoeing. And so
Yeah.
the wintertime is when the Columbia River Gorge tends to be the busiest. And so if you come, during the summer or during the fall, most of the locals are up in the mountains while the roads are still open. So
Yeah.
you can, it's definitely not bad crowded. Another one is Mount St. Helens, and there's really nothing quite like that. I mean, I guess you could go to Hawaii, but it's a volcano that famously, there was a massive landslide and then an eruption, and that all famously happened in the early 1980s. I believe it was May of 1980. And then that whole entire landscape in the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument was, I mean, it was turned into, I don't even. There's really no. I mean, people often describe it as a moonscape, or it looks like the moon. There's nothing
Hmm.
really to describe it. That blast just killed everything. But now we're 42 years afterwards, and so it's kind of a forest coming back to life, kind of a situation. And there's quite a bit of hiking up in and around Mount St. Helens that you won't find very many people at all up there. I would I would highly recommend the area around Coldwater Lake. It's a lake that didn't even exist prior to the eruption, and then the way all the landslide debris and everything came to rest, it was a brand new lake that was formed 42 years ago. That's not too far from my house. I can drive there in less than an hour, actually. Um,
That's where we were, right? We went to Mount St. Helens, and on
yep,
that it was really cloudy and
yep,
windy as heck.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It can definitely be windy up there. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yep, that was that time that we went and camped in the van and whatnot too.
Yep.
Yeah.
How is Watson?
Good.
Is he fixed yet?
Nope. They're supposed to be
Oh,
done like this month though. Should be
yeah.
any day now.
And so to the listeners, John has a wonderful, amazing van that you built from scratch. Not the van, but all the bed, the shelves, the bronze
Yeah.
sink. I mean, it's fancy.
Yeah,
And
we built the whole van. We did the whole van life thing, and
yeah.
we didn't know nothing about anything either. Like I've never framed anything. I don't know a thing about insulation. I've never constructed anything. I don't own any tool. Like this was. I mean, I had no idea what we were doing, and we just
Yeah. And
watched
I
YouTube
think,
tutorials and read things, and again helped us on several
yeah.
major things. But
But when you started that, I think we had just met actually.
yeah,
Because I think,
yeah,
we talked about you sent some pictures. Oh, look what we got done today. And oh, I'm
yeah,
going to be working on the van.
yeah,
But the van's name is Watson.
yeah.
And does he even still have an Instagram account?
I haven't tried to get on there in a long time. I'm not sure if that still exists or
I've
not.
been missing his posts. I mean, he was pretty active, and then he got hurt, so he's getting repaired.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole van life thing, I mean, it exists everywhere in the country now, but that's you'll certainly see a lot of that in the Pacific Northwest for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I felt like a badass ride in Watson.
Yeah. It's pretty
Spurred me to
convenient to be
like,
small enough
yeah,
to park in normal parking spots in a grocery store or whatever else,
yes.
and have have a bed and a sink and and all those things.
But also, like when we were at Paradise, it was like what 20 something degrees outside. We're inside, putting on our layers and eating and stuff, and these people are parked next to us. They have to get out of their car to do all that stuff, and you can just look, they're miserable, and we're
Oh
all
yeah.
in here like all toasty and
Yeah. Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's definitely nice in the wintertime. I
But
can remember a few times being out on a hike and it had just been pouring rain. You're just wet, and you can imagine
yeah.
what it's like. In a normal car, you're standing there and in the parking lot, you're wet and you're trying to take off wet stuff and trying to get into dry stuff, but it's still raining. Yeah, it was really nice to get into a van.
Also, Megan's mom, I think, or remember her mom and dad bought you that car camping air mattress.
Yeah,
Man, that thing is like it's nicer than the mattress I stay on.
we have we have two of those now actually. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you telling me that Megan's dad came down and really helped.
I was gonna say last winter I slept on that mattress in their backyard in Alaska as a camped out, wintertime camped out, and yeah, I got cold.
Yeah. But no, it was, to experience you building Watson and stuff, like it really got me like I want a van now. And so I that's every 2 or 3 days I tell Lori, can I have a van yet? Can I have a van yet?
They were really nice, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So now kind of moving on, what should we expect heading up to Washington with, what kind of wildlife that we may or may not encounter, or what are the potential? And that wraps up another exciting episode of the Trailblazing Texas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode today and stay tuned for our next episode where we will pick back up where we left off and guarantee to uncover many more hiking gems and share many more tips to enhance your experience on the trail. Until then, happy trails and happy hiking.